good to go? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Israeli Government Spokesman Eylon Levy. This is day 59 of the October 7th war. First, a brief update, and then I will take your questions. Latest figures. Since Hamas's declaration of war with the October 7th massacre, Hamas has fired over 11,500 rockets at Israel, with more than 2,000 failed launches, sirens in just the last few minutes in the southern city of Ashkelon. The death toll from the massacre stands at over 1,200. That number still rising as we discover missing persons believed to have been taken hostage were in fact murdered, with Hamas holding onto their bodies. The injury count since the massacre stands at 9,038. The IDF has notified families of the deaths of 401 soldiers, that number going up by 3 overnight, with the deaths of Sergeant Binyamin Yoshua Nidam, Sergeant Major Reserves Neria Shail, and Sergeant First Class Reserves Ben Zussman. That's in addition to 59 fallen members of the police forces. The number of internally displaced persons in Israel, those citizens evacuated from communities near the borders with Gaza and Lebanon, is now shy of 250,000. Total hostages still held by Hamas since October 7th, 137, including 20 women and 2 children. Those numbers unchanged since Hamas violated the terms of the hostage release pause last Friday and restarted this war. In just the last hour, hostages' families have been sharing new and harrowing details about the effects of the abuse of the hostages in the Hamas terror dungeons. They describe conditions of starvation to the point of arguments between hostages over water. Little girl survivors of Hamas captivity are waking up crying, unable to sleep most nights. Little Emilia Aloni was so traumatized by over 50 days of captivity that she refuses to let go of her mother, even to let her go to the bathroom at home. Doctors are attesting to the consequences for the health of these survivors, saying they have, quote, never seen such terrible hygiene as the conditions in which Hamas returned the hostages, having lost 10 to 15% of their body weight. These are, of course, the survivors Hamas has chosen to return before ending the hostage release pause by holding on to women and children in violation of the framework, and we can only imagine the state of the hostages Hamas is refusing to hand back, those who are still alive, of course. Nearly 60 days on from the October 7th massacre, disturbing new details are still coming to light about the crimes of the Hamas rapist regime and its deliberate use of sexual violence against Israeli women and girls. I hope by now everyone has read the harrowing expose in the Sunday Times, detailing an act of gang rape in which the victim begged to be killed and be put out of her misery, her rapist laughing before shooting her in the head. Another account of Hamas beheading a woman with a shovel. Testimonies from the morgue of broken pelvises and legs, women shot in their faces, breasts, and genitals. We hear the silence of international institutions about the barbaric sexual abuse of Israeli women and girls, and that deliberate silence is complicity. Today at 11:30 Eastern Time, Israel's UN mission will host an event exposing the horrors of Hamas's sex crimes, an event together with Sheryl Sandberg and Secretary Clinton, who has pre-recorded a message. We are demanding clear and unequivocal condemnations of these sexual atrocities, unequivocal condemnations by the UN and international community. Israel will dismantle the Hamas rapist regime so that it can never offend, and we will bring every last Hamas sex criminal to justice. Now, an operational update following Hamas's violation of the pause on December 1st and resumption of hostilities. The IDF is continuing its targeted strikes against Hamas terror assets, including Hamas military targets embedded under civilian facilities in flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. The Israeli Air Force has conducted strikes on approximately 200 Hamas terror targets, including infrastructure in a school in Beit Hanun, which was used to attack our forces. Troops discovered 2 tunnel shafts and explosives in that school compound, not regular facilities you would expect to find in an ordinary school. The IDF's precision campaign continues to target the perpetrators of the October 7th massacre, taking out Haitham Kouajari, the commander of the Hamas Shati battalion. Senior terrorist Kouajari had commanded Hamas death squads during the October 7th massacre and secured Hamas terror activity in the Shifa hospital, an abuse of a protected humanitarian institution, the World Health Organization and Red Cross are yet to condemn, scandalously. We will bring all the October 7th monsters to justice and everyone else as part of the Hamas terror regime threatening another October 7th. As the IDF expands its operations into southern Gaza to dismantle the Hamas terror state, it is intensifying efforts to minimize harm to civilians, despite Hamas's best efforts to maximize them. We are working to thwart Hamas's sick strategy of using civilians as human shields to sacrifice, their words, sacrifice them to advance their genocidal agenda against the Israeli people. The IDF takes extremely seriously its obligations under international law and the need for precision, hence the publication of a map dividing Gaza into precise areas to facilitate evacuations of civilians in the most precise way possible from areas of Hamas military operations, deliberately and cynically endangering them. I believe these efforts are in fact unprecedented in the history of counter-terror operations in urban areas to keep the other side's civilians safe from their own leaders, unprecedented in the history of counter-terrorism operations, and if we are mistaken, we will gladly have the record corrected. IDF forces continue to engage Hamas terrorists in battle, thwarting imminent attacks against our forces, striking weapons silos and Hamas military compounds. IDF forces have almost totally dismantled 2 Hamas brigades in northern Gaza in intense fighting, and we are working to dismantle the Hamas terror machine in the southern Gaza Strip too. A brief update from the northern border. Overnight and today, mortar shells from Lebanon toward IDF posts were fired in the area of Shtula and Yiftach. 3 IDF soldiers were lightly injured and evacuated for medical treatment. The IDF has struck the sources of the fire. The State of Israel continues to focus on the campaign to dismantle the Hamas terror state in Gaza, and the State of Israel remains committed to achieving the 3 principal goals of this war that Hamas declared with the October 7th massacre: securing the release of all the hostages, no one left behind, eliminating Hamas's reign of terror, and permanently removing the threat to Israel's citizens from the Gaza Strip, which we as a country have endured and tolerated for far too long. That's the end of today's update. We'll now take your questions over the chat. If you have questions, you could just write down, please, your name and media affiliations. We'll start with people in the room. Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
About the thinking the possible preparation for the post-Hamas control of Gaza. We hear there are only voices, so I'd like to see what we know. From Palestinian and from Cairo, kind of informal sources, talking of possible preparation of a temporary camp on the Egyptian side of the sea. Do you hear anything about that? There are some humanitarian, international humanitarian organizations thinking to have some facility in the eventuality of people, Palestinians, going temporarily in. Do you have anything about it? And then I have a follow-up question.
Not familiar with these reports. We've been urging Gazan civilians inside the Gaza Strip to evacuate to designated safe zones inside the Gaza Strip in the expectation that when the war is over, those people will be able to return and rebuild the Gaza Strip in a way that ensures that the concrete goes to people's houses and not to the sorts of terror tunnels we've been exposing under Shifa.
And secondly, rumors again of a possible role of Mohammed Alan coming back from Emirates, coming to Gaza.
Again, not familiar with these rumors. We've been very clear that the day after Hamas, which we wish were next week, unfortunately this is going to take time. 3 things are going to happen in order to prevent a relapse into further violence. 1, the total demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. It can never again host a terror army able to threaten the people of Israel again. Gaza will be demilitarized. 2, sustainable reconstruction in a way that ensures that this time international aid really does go towards civilian reconstruction and not rebuilding a military machine. And the 3rd point, which is where the international community's involvement will be needed most, is de-radicalization. to ensure that the next generation of Palestinian children are not brought up on the same diet of jihad and martyrdom as they have been in schools in the Gaza Strip, including those run by UNRWA, are taught to embrace peace with Israel, to understand that they in the Gaza Strip must live alongside a safe, secure, and sovereign state of Israel. The United Nations must stop cultivating their dreams of violently liberating, quote unquote, our country, erasing our country from the map, replacing our country. If there is a future for the Gaza Strip, it has to involve the next generation being taught that the state of Israel is here to stay, that it has a right to live in peace and security, and their best hope for a successful future is to live next to and work with the state of Israel, rather than continuing to fan these delusional dreams of wiping our country off the map. Yes, sir.
Armin Rosen from Tablet Magazine.
And how are you, Armin?
I'm doing well. Great to see you, Eylon. What are the sort of conditions under which the evacuees from the north will be able to return to their communities? And whose decision is that? Is it the defense ministers? Is it the communities themselves? What's sort of the criteria there?
At the moment, we've evacuated communities from the borders near Lebanon, because the threat from October 7th has made clear exactly what the threat to those civilians are. We cannot take the risk of an October 7th style raid and massacre of Israeli villagers along the border with Lebanon, as we saw with the Gaza Strip. In addition, we're talking about places that would be within mere seconds of mortar fire rather than minutes. Now, those people have been evacuated from their homes. We haven't set specific timelines for their return to their communities. We've been very clear. Our policy is we are not interested in fighting on two fronts at the same time. We are focusing on destroying the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre. And our message to anyone thinking of entering this war is the same as President Biden himself said. Don't. If Hezbollah enters this war, drags us into a full-scale war, it will be making the mistake of its lifetime. The consequences for both Hezbollah and the state of Lebanon will be severe, and we hope that we will be able to restore full security along that border in order to facilitate the return of those civilians to their home, because of course they have an absolute right to live in security in their homes in every inch of our country, just as you would in Tel Aviv, as they should on the border with Lebanon.
We've had a request to repeat the figures given at the beginning due to some technical problems with the sound.
Figures repeated at the beginning, I'll recap quickly. Over 11,500 rockets fired at Israel since Hamas's declaration of war with the October 7th massacre. That includes 2,000 failed launches. Death toll from the massacre, over 1,200. Injury count, 9,038. 401 fallen soldiers, 59 fallen members of the police forces, 137 hostages still in Gaza, including 20 women and 2 children, nearly 250,000 internally displaced persons. Those are the current figures we have.
Question from Lior Soroka, The Washington Post. Hamas is holding 15 bodies of Israelis in Gaza. How many of them were believed to have been alive when they went into Gaza, or rather, how many were taken after being killed in Israel?
I can't give you an exact breakdown at the moment of who was murdered in Hamas captivity, who may have been murdered at the beginning of the October 7th massacre and their bodies abducted into the Gaza Strip. Either way, what matters is that Hamas must return all of the hostages immediately and unconditionally. It is sick and disgusting to hold innocent people hostage. It is perhaps even more depraved and barbaric to hold their bodies hostage and to deny their families the closure of at least giving them burial on the soil of the land of Israel. And we're demanding that Hamas release everyone, absolutely everyone, last man, woman, child, alive, unfortunately dead, and we will continue to bring to justice the perpetrators of the October 7th massacre, whether they murdered those people on October 7th or whether they murdered them subsequently in captivity.
Question from Jim Williams, Zenga International News Service, Washington, D.C. Any comments on US National Security Council spokeswoman John Kirby, who said on both Fox and NBC yesterday, if the US were attacked on October 7th, we would fight Hamas just like Israel. He also said that comments made by Vice President Harris and General Austin about the importance to protect innocent civilians was something Israel was going to was going out of their way to do. Lastly, he said what was underreported was that both VP Harris and General Austin said Israel had the right to defend themselves. Thank you.
The US administration has been absolutely clear and unwavering since the moment the October 7th massacre began that Israel has not only a right but an obligation to defend itself, and that right to self-defense extends to the total destruction of the Hamas terror machine that perpetrated this massacre, so it can never do it again. That policy from our allies and friends in the United States has been unwavering and consistent from the very beginning, and the remarks you mentioned there from National Security Council spokesman John Kirby echo what President Biden said right at the beginning of this war, I believe in those famous remarks from the White House when he said that if the United States had been attacked in the way Israel was, its response would be, I think the words were swift, decisive, and overwhelming. So our American friends and partners understand exactly what we are fighting against. Their support has been both moral, diplomatic, material as well. We've been learning from our American partners who are, of course, greatly experienced with counterterrorism operations in urban areas about how they conducted their wars, how we can improve in a lessons learned process in order to minimize harm to civilians. And as I said, I believe that this map that the IDF has published, dividing Gaza into very, very small specific zones in order to facilitate evacuations in the most targeted way possible, minimizing incidental harm to civilians from Hamas's decision to declare this war and to fight this war from inside densely populated areas. That level of precision is unprecedented in the history of counterterrorism operations in urban areas, and if we are wrong on that, we will gladly have the record corrected.
Question from Frederick Ager, Interplanetary TV. Hostages' families are complaining of being ignored by the government, having the feeling that the release of hostages comes second after the eradication of Hamas. The Prime Minister reassured he would receive them, but what can you tell us regarding the effort made to release the hostages during the operation? A soldier was released in the first phase. What efforts are being made by the IDF to release the hostages? There are elderly without medication in dire need for attention. Thanks.
First of all, the hostages' families are absolutely right to be angry and anxious about the fate of their loved ones inside the Gaza Strip, as you'd expect the family of anyone, whether a child, an adult, or an elderly person abducted and held incommunicado in inhumane conditions. Let's remember many of these hostages abducted either with chronic conditions or with life-threatening injuries or otherwise extremely vulnerable. They've been denied access to the Red Cross, and the families are right to fight to do everything possible in order to bring them back, and that is what the State of Israel is doing. If it were possible to swoop in with special forces and conduct an Entebbe-style raid in order to rescue hostages, we would of course do that. But Hamas has spent a long time planning to abduct our civilians, to hold them inside dark, booby-trapped tunnels. And so inasmuch as the prospect of swooping in with an Entebbe-style raid is not an option, our strategy has been to put unrelenting military pressure on the Hamas terror regime to clobber it until it begs for a breather. And we saw that strategy vindicated when Hamas agreed to a 7-day hostage release pause so it could catch its breath, and in exchange returned 110 hostages, including almost all the children, apart from the 2 Bibas children Hamas now cynically claims are dead. So that strategy with the release of 110 hostages, including almost all the children, has proven itself. And we are now going back to our efforts to put unrelenting military pressure on Hamas in order to secure the release of those hostages. Of course, if we had taken the advice of certain well-wishers in the international community to go for a ceasefire weeks ago, all 110 of those hostages would still be hostages of Hamas. And if we took the advice of other well-wishers who want us to go for a permanent ceasefire now, we would be abandoning the other 137 hostages in Hamas captivity and leaving Hamas free to murder, behead, rape, and abduct our people again, as Hamas has been consistently threatening to do since October 7th. So we're continuing to put unrelenting military pressure on Hamas to release those hostages, and this war will end ultimately with the end of Hamas.
Question from Jonathan Sacerdotti, Jewish Chronicle UK. Do any hostages remain in Yemen from the ship seized? And if so, how many and which nationalities?
That would not be a question for us. We're not talking about an Israeli ship that was targeted with Yemen. But of course, the recent attacks by Houthi rebels on ships in the Red Sea serve as a powerful and potent reminder of the clear and present danger that the Iranian regime poses to international peace and security. This is a threat not only to the Israeli people, but to the broader region, to the whole world. These attacks, just like the crimes of October 7th, are crimes not only against the Israeli people, but crimes against humanity. And we are fighting for humanity, and we are fighting to uphold the basic rules of the international rules-based order and of international peace and security, as well against the forces that are determined to destabilize the region.
Question from Thomas Watkins, The National. Is Israel still contemplating a buffer zone within Gaza, even though the US has opposed such a measure that would shrink Gaza's size?
Our three principles for the day after Hamas, again, we wish it were next week, but those three principles are the total demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, de-radicalization, and reconstruction, sustainable reconstruction. We understand that Israel will need to have a measure of security control in order to prevent Hamas from rearming. We will have to learn the lessons of the previous Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, when we gave the keys to the Palestinians and in exchange received this terror state. So demilitarization is a top priority, a priority the United States has also echoed and made clear is also an objective of the United States, that Gaza must never again host such a military force. But beyond that, we can't get into details at this stage. We are still unfortunately, still in early stages of dismantling the Hamas terror state, and that campaign will now continue.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. My name is Aaron Porras. I'm with the Media Line News. Have you addressed any allegations of the use of white phosphorus in civilian areas in Gaza?
The IDF does not use white phosphorus for incendiary purposes. To the extent it may be used, we are talking about small quantities that are used in munitions that are for smokescreen purposes, which are permitted under international law when they are used far away from densely populated areas, and the IDF takes very seriously its obligation to use munitions in accordance with international law, and all munitions the IDF has been using are in full accordance with the strictest standards of the laws of armed conflict.
Thank you. Follow-up question, just unrelated. Do you have an accurate number of the Hamas militants and Islamic Jihad militants, for that matter, in the West Bank that the IDF is acting against?
I do not have off-the-cuff numbers of Hamas terrorists who have been arrested in the West Bank, but it's an important reminder that when the October 7th massacre started, Hamas's strategy was immediately to widen it beyond Gaza, when they immediately called on Palestinians in the West Bank to grab guns and knives and join in the violence, urging Hezbollah ever since to escalate their conflicts, other regional actors, and our strategy at the moment is to contain this conflict, to focus on bringing to justice the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre and preventing any wider escalation of this conflict. Okay?
Another question.
One more question, then we're going to have to wrap up.
Okay, last question from the Washington Post again. IDF official told Maariv that IDF forces are close to completing their mission in northern Gaza. Any comment?
Indeed, we have been working very decisively in northern Gaza to dismantle the Hamas terror state and expose evidence of its crimes against humanity, most notably the tunnel complex underneath the Shifa hospital, which many for so long denied or tried to Gaza-light us into believing didn't exist, and we have exposed. The Israeli army said just 2 days ago, on record, we're very close to totally destroying 2 Hamas brigades in northern Gaza, and the fighting is going to continue in the south as we move to dismantle the whole of the Hamas terror state, having defeated the remaining Hamas military forces. And it's important to understand also that that is the context of what is happening here. Sometimes we see what is the campaign described in terms of an Israeli bombardment. Our soldiers are engaged on the ground in fierce fighting with Hamas military forces on the ground. We're close to completing that mission in northern Gaza, and we will continue to dismantle Hamas's military and governing infrastructure in the whole of the Gaza Strip in order to restore security for the people of Israel. Okay? I think that's all we have time for at the moment. I'm afraid that's all we have time for at the moment. Thank you very much.